The year is 2025. A second Trump administration, firmly entrenched in its America First economic policy, has unleashed a new wave of significant tariffs. These measures, including a broad 10% levy on most imported goods, soared to a staggering 145% on selected Chinese products, with an overall increase of 125% on Chinese imports. The stated objective, reiterated often by administration officials, was the noble protection of American jobs and domestic industries from what they termed unfair foreign competition. This aggressive stance was designed to reshape global trade dynamics, compelling companies to prioritize American manufacturing and labor, thereby, in theory, revitalizing the nation's industrial base and ensuring prosperity for its workers. The air was thick with economic nationalism, a sentiment the administration had championed consistently. Into this charged atmosphere, news of an unprecedented corporate maneuver began to filter into the White House. Amazon, the e-commerce behemoth and a titan of American innovation, was reportedly preparing to announce its departure from the US market. Initial reports were met with a degree of disbelief, perhaps even dismissal, within some administration circles. However, as confirmations mounted, the sheer gravity of such a decision began to sink in. For an administration that had staked so much of its credibility on bringing business back to American shores and bolstering domestic enterprise, the potential exit of a company as symbolic and economically significant as Amazon represented not just a policy challenge, but a profound public relations crisis. The core of Amazon's drastic consideration lay in the arithmetic of the new tariffs. The company, heavily reliant on a global supply chain and a vast network of international third-party sellers, saw the new import duties as an existential threat to its operational model within the United States. The 10% tariff on a wide array of goods, compounded by the sharply higher rates on Chinese products, a major sourcing hub for countless items sold on the platform, rendered its low-margin, high-volume business model untenable. The costs, Amazon executives argued, would inevitably have to be passed on to consumers, leading to price hikes that would decimate demand and erode its competitive edge against retailers with different sourcing strategies or a more limited import dependency. This developing situation was not the first instance of the Trump administration's trade policies leading to friction with major corporations or entire industries. However, the scale of Amazon's potential response was on an entirely different level. Previous disputes had involved specific products, retaliatory measures from other countries affecting certain sectors, or companies altering investment plans. The notion of a company of Amazon's magnitude so deeply interwoven into the fabric of American commerce and daily life, choosing to completely uproot its primary operations from its home country, was a scenario few had seriously contemplated. It signaled that the administration's tariff strategy might be about to produce consequences far beyond its intended scope, triggering an economic event of historic proportions. The official confirmation arrived with the force of an economic earthquake. Amazon CEO Andy Jassy, in a somber and direct address, announced the company's decision to relocate its headquarters and cease major operations within the United States. Jassy stated unequivocally that the new U.S. tariffs had made it impossible to operate competitively in the American market. He elaborated that the complex web of import duties, particularly the severe levies on goods from China, had fundamentally undermined the company's ability to offer a wide selection of products at prices consumers had come to expect. The announcement was not just a business decision, it was a statement that resonated through every sector of the American economy and beyond, signaling a dramatic response to the administration's protectionist policies. In his communication, Jassy emphasized that this monumental step was deemed necessary for Amazon's survival and for the viability of its millions of third-party sellers, who relied on the platform to reach American consumers. The CEO painted a picture of a company pushed to the brink by a hostile regulatory environment, where the cost of doing business had become prohibitively high almost overnight. The immediate aftermath saw Amazon's stock price experience significant volatility, and a palpable wave of uncertainty swept through the business community. Other import-reliant businesses watched with trepidation, wondering if they too would be forced to make similarly drastic choices in the face of escalating trade tensions and rising operational costs, creating an atmosphere of widespread economic anxiety. Looking ahead, Jassy outlined Amazon's strategic pivot. The company would now shift its primary focus and resources towards burgeoning international markets, where it perceived more favorable operating conditions and growth potential. This included plans to significantly bolster support systems for its sellers in other countries and to make substantial investments in overseas logistics, hubs, and infrastructure. The United States, for so long Amazon's largest market and the engine of its global growth, was explicitly stated to be no longer its primary growth engine. This declaration marked a stunning reversal for a company that had become synonymous with American e-commerce dominance, reshaping its global strategy in a fundamental way. The human cost of this decision was immediately apparent and deeply concerning. Jassy acknowledged that the move was expected to impact thousands of American jobs, a somber forecast for the dedicated workforce across Amazon's vast network of fulfillment centers, corporate offices, and delivery operations. Beyond the direct job losses at Amazon itself, the ripple effects were predicted to be extensive, touching suppliers, local businesses that serviced Amazon facilities, and entire communities that had become economically dependent on the company's presence. The announcement cast a long shadow over the employment landscape, particularly in regions where Amazon had been a major employer, heralding a period of significant economic dislocation for many American families. The moment Andy Jassy's announcement concluded, the global media apparatus ignited. News alerts flashed across smartphones, television networks broke into regular programming with special reports, and websites of major newspapers featured bold, stark headlines: Amazon abandons America. The story instantly dominated news cycles worldwide, a testament to Amazon's colossal global footprint and the profound implications of its departure from its home market. International outlets from London to Tokyo analyzed the decision not just as a business story but as a geopolitical event, questioning the stability of the US economy and the far-reaching consequences of its trade policies. The sheer audacity of the move captured global attention unlike any corporate decision in recent memory. Press briefings were hastily convened, offering contrasting narratives that further fueled the media frenzy. Amazon spokespeople reiterated Jassy's core message, framing the exit as an unavoidable consequence of punitive tariffs that crippled their business model. They emphasized a reluctant departure, forced by economic realities.
Conversely, the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, presented a strikingly different interpretation. She characterized Amazon's decision as politically charged, premature, and hostile, urging the company to reconsider and engage in dialogue with the administration.
This immediate clash of narratives set the stage for a protracted public debate over blame and responsibility for the unfolding crisis. Financial news channels and publications scrambled to provide analysis, with commentators and economists offering a spectrum of opinions.
Moody's analyst David Cameron's assessment quickly gained traction. He described the tariffs and Amazon's subsequent exit as causing a seismic shift in global trade patterns, a phrase that encapsulated the magnitude of the disruption.
Wall Street reacted with predictable nervousness as uncertainty clouded the outlook for countless businesses linked to Amazon's ecosystem and the broader retail sector. International markets also registered the shockwaves, concerned about the potential for escalating trade wars and the health of the world's largest economy, which now faced a self-inflicted wound of considerable proportions. The digital town square of social media platforms erupted with a torrent of reactions. Business leaders expressed dismay, with some warning of a chilling effect on investment in the US. Economists debated the long-term ramifications, while ordinary citizens shared their anxieties about job security and rising prices. The discourse was predictably highly polarized. Supporters of the administration's tariff policies often echoed the White House line, accusing Amazon of disloyalty or political maneuvering. Critics, however, saw Amazon's exit as a damning indictment of a reckless and self-destructive trade strategy, highlighting the real-world pain inflicted by abstract economic theories when applied without foresight. The story was not just news, it became a cultural and political flashpoint. The economic repercussions of the tariffs and Amazon's departure began to manifest with alarming speed, sending tremors throughout the nation's financial foundations. Projections indicated a potential 15% reduction in overall U.S. imports, a staggering figure that underscored the scale of the disruption. Supply chains, already strained by global events, faced a $13 billion negative impact directly attributable to the new import duties. Businesses reported immediate paralysis, grappling with crippling customs delays, exponentially surging logistics costs, and an unpredictable regulatory landscape that made future planning nearly impossible. The very arteries of commerce seemed to be constricting under the weight of these new economic pressures. Consumers quickly felt the sting as price tags began to climb. Apparel costs shot up by an average of 17%, while the price of a new car increased by an estimated $3,000 due to tariffs on imported parts and materials. Overall, consumer prices registered a sharp 12% increase, eroding household purchasing power across the board. The impact was widespread, touching everyday necessities and discretionary items alike. Electronics, furniture, coffee, chocolate, and groceries all saw significant price hikes. Even the cost of fuel was not immune, with gas prices in the Midwest, for instance, jumping by 50 cents per gallon, adding another layer of financial burden to American families. The logistics sector, a critical enabler of modern commerce, found itself in an acute crisis. United Parcel Service, UPS, a bellwether for the industry, announced devastating cuts. 20,000 jobs were to be eliminated, 164 operations facilities shuttered, and 73 buildings closed. UPS CEO Carol Tome directly attributed this accelerated restructuring to the dual impact of the new tariffs and Amazon's US exit. She stated the company was now forced to shift its focus towards profitability over maintaining low-margin, high-volume accounts, many of which were tied to the e-commerce boom Amazon had spearheaded. Consequently, unemployment figures within the broader logistics sector began a worrying ascent.
The physical landscape also bore witness to the economic upheaval. U.S. ports, once bustling with container ships, reported significant revenue losses due to plummeting shipping volumes. Perhaps most symbolically, former Amazon fulfillment centers, vast edifices that once hummed with activity, began to stand empty and silent across the country.
These ghost warehouses served as stark, tangible reminders of the corporate giant's departure. Considering Amazon accounted for a massive 40% of US e-commerce and was utilized by an astounding 83% of US households, its absence created an economic vacuum that would be profoundly difficult to fill, leaving a gaping hole in the American retail and logistics infrastructure. The international response to the US tariffs and Amazon's dramatic exit was swift and punitive, setting off a cascade of retaliatory measures that further destabilized global trade. China, a primary target of the Trump administration's heightened import duties, did not hesitate to strike back. Beijing announced a new slate of retaliatory tariffs specifically targeting key American exports, including US coal, natural gas, and a range of other goods. This precise counter-maneuver was clearly designed to inflict maximum economic pain on sensitive sectors within the American economy, demonstrating China's resolve to meet protectionism with its own formidable trade weapons and escalating the already tense economic standoff. Beyond direct tariffs, China also broadened its retaliatory scope by initiating an antitrust investigation into Google, another American tech giant. This move was widely interpreted as a signal that the confrontation was expanding beyond mere trade in goods into the fiercely competitive technology sector. The investigation raised concerns about the operational freedom of other US tech companies in China and added a significant geopolitical dimension to the escalating dispute. It suggested that Beijing was prepared to leverage all available tools, including regulatory scrutiny, to counter what it perceived as aggressive American economic policies, thereby deepening the rift between the two global powers. Closer to home, Mexico, a crucial trading partner under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, indicated its strong disapproval and signaled the potential for its own retaliatory tariffs. Mexican officials explicitly referenced the USMCA, implying that the U.S. actions could be in violation of the Trilateral Trade Pact's spirit or letter. This development threatened to unravel the carefully negotiated trade relationships within North America. Concerns also rippled through Canada, another major US trading partner. The situation was particularly alarming given that nearly half of all US imports, valued at over $1.3 trillion annually, originated from Canada, China, and Mexico, highlighting the vulnerability of American supply chains to these rapidly deteriorating international relations. The European Union, representing another significant bloc of global economic power, weighed in with a strong appeal to the United States. EU leaders publicly urged the Trump administration to reconsider its protectionist measures, citing the profound destabilization these policies were causing to global markets and international trade norms. Meanwhile, the cumulative effect of these international retaliations began to bite deeply into the American export sector. US exports declined noticeably as foreign markets erected new barriers. American farmers, automakers, and manufacturers who relied on global demand found themselves facing shrinking orders and increasing uncertainty, directly contradicting the administration's stated goal of bolstering American industry. The fallout from the tariffs and Amazon's abrupt departure delivered a devastating 1-2 punch to America's small businesses, many of whom had built their livelihoods around the e-commerce giant's platform and relied on access to affordable imported goods. For these entrepreneurs, the crisis was twofold: the sudden disappearance of a primary sales channel that connected them to millions of customers, and the simultaneous surge in the cost of goods due to the newly imposed import duties.
My shipping costs doubled almost overnight while my sales were slashed in half. It's been a nightmare.
This dual shockwave threatened the very existence of countless small enterprises, from online retailers to local artisans who sourced materials globally, leaving them scrambling to navigate an increasingly hostile economic environment. In response to the mounting pressures, small business owners were forced to make exceedingly difficult choices.
Some, like vendor Dave Fong, saw no alternative but to increase their prices significantly, in his case by a staggering 30%. A move that risked alienating customers already grappling with broader inflation.
Others attempted to absorb the initial shock by drastically cutting operational costs, such as slashing advertising budgets or significantly reducing their inventory levels. These were often desperate measures taken merely to stay afloat, buying time while hoping for a reprieve that seemed increasingly unlikely in the current climate of trade disputes.
For a growing number of small businesses, however, these coping mechanisms proved insufficient. The financial strain became unbearable, leading to the heartbreaking decision to cease operations entirely.
An Ohio-based electronics importer, for example, who had relied heavily on Chinese goods and the Amazon marketplace, found it impossible to continue under the new tariff regime and the loss of his primary sales avenue.
These individual stories paint a grim picture of Main Street's agony, a direct consequence of macroeconomic policies.
Faced with such dire circumstances, surviving small businesses began a frantic search for alternatives. Some exporters were attempting to shift their production bases away from China to countries like Vietnam and Mexico to circumvent the most punitive US tariffs. Domestically, American small businesses explored redirecting their limited resources towards other, potentially less volatile international markets, such as those in Europe and Canada. This scramble to adapt, however, was fraught with its own set of challenges, including establishing new supply chains, understanding different market dynamics, and competing with established players in unfamiliar territories. In the face of mounting economic turmoil and widespread criticism, the White House launched a concerted effort to defend its tariff policies and manage the public relations fallout from Amazon's unprecedented decision. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt became the primary voice of the administration's stance, addressing the nation in daily press briefings.
Amazon's move to exit the US market is politically charged, premature, and overtly hostile. We urge Amazon to reconsider its drastic course of action and instead engage in constructive dialogue with the administration.
The administration's core defense of its aggressive tariff strategy remained anchored in the assertion that these measures were fundamentally designed to protect American workers and vital domestic industries from unfair foreign competition. Officials repeatedly argued that the tariffs were a necessary, albeit sometimes painful, tool to level the global playing field and encourage a resurgence of American manufacturing.
These tariffs are a negotiating tool, part of a broader long-term strategy aimed at securing more favorable trade deals for America.
However, this narrative faced an increasingly stark contrast with the immediate, tangible negative consequences being reported daily. Widespread job losses, escalating consumer prices, and significant disruptions to supply chains, creating a growing credibility gap for the administration's economic arguments. Further highlighting the administration's sensitivity to the situation, reports emerged of President Trump's direct personal involvement.
The president has personally contacted Jeff Bezos regarding a rumored plan for Amazon's separate Hall e-commerce site to display the specific costs of the new tariffs to consumers at checkout.
The White House reportedly viewed such a transparency initiative as a hostile and political act. Amazon later clarified that this was never a consideration for its main Amazon.com platform, but the reported exchange underscored the administration's intense focus on controlling the narrative surrounding its trade policies and their impact.
The administration is actively developing measures aimed at providing targeted relief for the sectors most severely affected by the tariffs and Amazon's departure.
In a statement that seemed to acknowledge the disruptive power of the tariffs, the Commerce Secretary described them as a negotiating tool, suggesting they were part of a broader, long-term strategy aimed at securing more favorable trade deals for America, even if the short-term costs were proving to be exceptionally high. The shockwaves from Amazon's US exit and the escalating trade crisis quickly reached the corridors of power on Capitol Hill, prompting an urgent response from federal lawmakers. Emergency hearings were swiftly convened in both the House of Representatives and the Senate as members of Congress from both sides of the aisle grappled with the profound economic implications of the administration's policies and the corporate giant's departure. The atmosphere was one of heightened concern, with many lawmakers expressing alarm over the rapidly deteriorating situation and its potential to plunge the nation into a deeper economic downturn, demanding immediate answers and solutions. During these tense hearings, prominent lawmakers, including figures like Senator Lisa Martinez, voiced pointed questions directly challenging the administration's handling of the trade dispute and its apparent lack of preparedness for such severe disruptions. Senator Martinez, among others, pressed administration officials on whether they had adequately anticipated the potential for a company of Amazon's scale to take such drastic action in response to the tariffs. There was a palpable sense of frustration among legislators regarding the unforeseen consequences that were now unfolding, impacting constituents and businesses across every state, raising questions about the foresight and planning behind the tariff strategy. A significant focus of the congressional scrutiny was the undeniable human impact of the unfolding crisis. Lawmakers demanded detailed information from administration officials regarding any plans or safety nets in place for the thousands of American workers facing layoffs, not only from Amazon but also from ancillary industries like UPS and countless small businesses. The plight of these displaced workers became a central theme, with members of Congress pressing for robust support programs, retraining initiatives, and economic assistance to help affected families and communities navigate the difficult transition. The pressure mounted on the administration to demonstrate that it had a compassionate and effective response to the growing unemployment. Beyond the immediate crisis management, the events reignited a much broader and more fundamental debate on Capitol Hill concerning the direction of U.S. trade policy. The aggressive, unilateral tariff strategy championed by the administration came under intense scrutiny, with many lawmakers questioning its overall effectiveness and wisdom in a complex globalized economy. There were increasing calls from various quarters for a more nuanced, multilateral approach to international trade negotiations, one that prioritized American interests without triggering destructive trade wars and alienating key allies. The crisis forced a critical re-evaluation of America's role and strategy in the global economic arena, with long-term implications for future policy decisions. The confluence of aggressive U.S. tariffs and Amazon's historic departure from its home market signaled more than just a temporary disruption. It marked what Moody's analyst David Cameron aptly described as a seismic shift in global trade patterns. The established norms and relatively predictable flows of international commerce, which had characterized the global economy for decades, appeared to be fracturing. This was not merely a bilateral dispute or a sector-specific problem. It was an event that fundamentally altered the landscape, ushering in an era of heightened uncertainty and potentially redrawing the map of global economic power and influence for years to come. The immediate vulnerabilities were starkly exposed in several key sectors of the US economy. The automotive industry, heavily reliant on intricate global supply chains for parts and components, faced immense pressure. The energy sector, a target of retaliatory tariffs, saw its export markets shrink. Similarly, the food and agriculture sector, already sensitive to trade fluctuations, braced for significant impacts as international buyers sought alternative suppliers. The crisis underscored the deep interconnectedness of the US economy with global partners, particularly Canada, China, and Mexico, which collectively accounted for nearly half of all US imports, valued at over $1.3 trillion, revealing critical dependencies. US tariffs are compelling global exporters to fundamentally rethink their business structures. Faced with dramatically increased costs for accessing the American market, these businesses are left with two primary options: either pass on the tariff-related price increases to US consumers, risking a significant drop in demand, or withdraw from the US market altogether. Many, he noted, were actively exploring shifts in production to countries like Vietnam and Mexico to circumvent US duties, indicating a broader realignment of global manufacturing and export strategies in response to American protectionism. Ultimately, the Amazon exodus and the ensuing trade turmoil cast a long and ominous shadow over the future of the US economy and its standing in global commerce. Profound questions arose about the nation's long-term competitiveness in a rapidly changing world, the future viability of American jobs in an increasingly protectionist environment, and the potential for prolonged economic hardship if these trade disputes were to escalate further. The challenge for the United States became one of navigating a far more fragmented, contentious, and unpredictable global trade landscape, a daunting task with significant implications for its prosperity and its role as a global economic leader in the 21st century.